Grateful for the distinguished audience that is assembled here. Maharathis are sitting in the front, former bureaucrats, enlightened businessmen sitting here, academics. What more can I ask for? And it's a Saturday evening. I can promise you that whatever I have to say will not put you to sleep, but will perhaps provoke a little bit of thought. And that's not a bad way to spend a Saturday evening. First of all, I want to say that in this book that, Mike, you lift this, huh? That book is available, Jamshedji Tata book, which I co-authored with a former colleague, Harish Bhatt. And everybody is honoring us as the authors. But the story is a good one. We just happen to be the storytellers. So we accept your honor in a surrogate manner because fundamentally the story needs to be told. As you all know that Ramayana is famous, Mahabharata is famous, but very few people remember Valmiki or Vedavyasa who wrote it. They remember Ram, Lakshman, Arjuna, Krishna, etc. So that's the right way to do it. Neither am I claiming that we have the wisdom of Vedavyasa or the erudition which Valmiki showed in writing the Ramayana. What I can do in the next half an hour, 40 minutes or thereabouts, is to just give you a helicopter ride. Because the book covers 156 years. And I thought some birds are tweeting. And it is not a biography of Jamshedji Tata, although his picture appears there. It is not a biography of Jamshedji Tata because the first biography of Jamshedji Tata was written in 1935 before I was born. So for me to attempt to write his biography, unless I'm a historiographer or a researcher, doesn't make sense. I joined Tata when I was quite mature. I was already 52 when I joined Tata's. I call it my second career. And when you're 52, you tend to be a bit skeptical, if not cynical, because dunya dekha hua hai. And when I joined Tata's, I was very struck by certain things. And that started sloshing around in my head. There are lots of weaknesses in Tata's, by the way. I mean, show me an organization which has not got weaknesses and I'll say, here's a liar. Just like all of us human beings, we have got our own weaknesses. And the only person who can tell that to your face is your wife. And the same way, every organization has its weaknesses, it makes its mistakes, some of which are covered in the book. But this is not an analysis of Tata. It is about something very, very distinctive that even a potentially skeptical, cynical guy like me could detect. And I said, this is a story that must be told. And I collaborated with my young friend who is not here today. And what is that distinctiveness about Tata? I'm now going to make an extreme statement. I may be proven wrong day after tomorrow because I have not done my homework as well as I think, but I think I've done my homework. In the whole planet, you will not find another organization which has done 5 things that Tata has done. First, it has lasted 156 years. And there are companies which also have lasted 156 years. It's not the only one. But in addition to lasting 156 years, it's still looking as though it's okay and thriving. It's not sort of, it's certainly not signs of collapsing. You may not agree with everything that they do. 156 years is a long time. The second thing that is unique about Tata is that it had an original purpose. Why am I doing business? And that purpose has remained unchanged for 156 years. That's rare. In the modern equity and financial markets, new CEOs come and they say, we want to increase shareholder value, get the unicorn, decacorn, all that stuff. But you've kept a purpose for 156 years. It's like a very, very loyal wife or husband who throughout his or her life has served the spouse and the family, by and large with loyalty. Occasionally made a few mistakes. What is that purpose? That this firm exists not for society but because of society. That's rare. Many people will say, yes, we exist for society, we are also there to do CSR or whatever. They say, because of society. It's the people who buy our cars, stay in our hotels, who eat our salt, who buy our tea, who buy our watches, our jewelry. Because of them, we earn money. So they are our Malik. And in some way, Jamshedji Tata said this in 1880, this money must go back to them. Because it's not ours. We've just been given the privilege of serving them. So that's the second. The purpose is very distinctive. The third thing is that it has remained on top for 150 years. That's very rare. You all know the Fortune 500 companies keep getting renewed all the time. And, General Motors, General Electric, Ford Motor Company, they were all on top and then they go around in a loop. The first time companies were evaluated for their scale and size and ranked was by the erstwhile colonial government in 1939. And I think they wanted to find out who are the big guys who may be funding the Congress party. That's my assumption. I don't have evidence for that, but it's possible. And Tatas were on top with a total capital of 24 crores. 1939, 24 crores was, my father used to tell me, lots of money. Then in 1969, it was now an independent India, we had a Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Practices Commission, for which a committee was appointed to find out who are the monopolists. In the process, they ranked people by their size, and Tatas came on top. Then, of course, since liberalization in 1991, every magazine, every newspaper awards the biggest, the famous, the bestest, the most innovative, the highest shareholder value. And if not at the top, Tata comes somewhere near the top. Depends on who's doing the ranking. No company in the world has stayed on top for 156 years. And that's the third feature of unique thing. In writing this book, I did a lot of reading of biographies of great industrialists to see how they worked on these aspects. I found Andrew Carnegie for steel, 500 pages. Henry Ford for automobiles. Thomas Edison for electricity, and Nikola Tesla. Conrad Hilton for hotels. Johann Trippe for airlines. He's the one who set up Pan Am. And coming to more recent times, and then DuPont for chemicals. You come to more recent times, you had Thomas Watson for information processing. And then you go further on, you say, who made chips? You say Bob Noyce for chips. So I had about 12 biographies, each of about 300-400 pages. So I'm giving you the impression I've done a lot of research. I've done a lot of reading to see whether any of these characteristics could be seen in them. But in the process, I came to a stunning reality which is in front of me, but sometimes you don't notice reality. We all lead our lives thinking we know, but actually sometimes you suddenly stop. Your little daughter was so small and suddenly she's become big. All of us stumble on that. That in India, if you had to write who's done all of these, it's only one name. It's Tata. How the heck does Tata manage to do all the things that require 12 or 14 people to do it in other countries, and about whom biographies have been written? So that was another thing that sort of caused me. And the last thing about Tata, which I found very, very unique, which motivated me to inquire into this subject, is that throughout this period, not only has the shareholder been rewarded, there have been ups and downs. There have been times when you not made profit, you had to cut dividend. But throughout this period, every Tata entity kept doing something which affected the community. Whether it's a cancer hospital, or an institute of fundamental research, or an institute of science, or many other things which I won't go into. But the problems of our nation, unfortunately, are so large that, as economist Alfred Marshall said in 1910, when an Indian economics student called B. Mukherjee wrote to him and said, "How can India progress faster?" Alfred Marshall wrote, "If India had a score or two more of Mr. Tatas, India will be unstoppable." Whether we have a score or two more of Tatas today is a matter for each person to decide. I'm not saying we don't have or we have, but we need more than, for those who didn't study in the old days, a score is 20. So he said if you had 20 or 40 Tatas, it will be good. We actually need 200 or 400 Tatas for this country to progress. I do not believe Viksit Bharat will happen in the way we have thought of it in the public imagination if we do not have sustainable, humane, and enlightened private enterprise. And government will be the first one to admit that it can't be done by government. Government can do its bit. Creating entrepreneurship or business at any cost is not what I'm talking about. I've used the word she, as he said in the introduction, because it's sustainable, humane, and enlightened. Now, what that means, you can write another few books, but I shan't go into that subject now. I shall restrict myself to making the point because it communicates. Most of us understand what I'm saying. I sat down, after I retired, I felt I had the perspective of time and some amount of remaining intellect, whatever was left after my retirement, to think about all the years that I've lived through. And I said, let me write down the name of 20 companies which are sustainable, humane, and enlightened. One of the characteristics of that being they are non-controversial. They're not in the newspaper every morning. They will be in the newspaper from time to time. That's not a bad thing. But if you're perpetually in controversy with one agency or another looking after you or people gossiping, I consider that a controversial person. This is a subjective evaluation. You may disagree with me. I find it difficult to get more than 10. I found it difficult to write more than 10. And even that 10 could be argued about. Somebody may say it should be 7. That is a pity. That if I put it to 100 people, which I have not done, and then, so I used to run a program when I was in Tata Management Training Center was part of my portfolio. And young people would come there. I'd say, write down the name of 10 companies you respect. People wrote 15 companies. I said, write down the name of 15 companies which you love. They couldn't go beyond 1 or 2, max 3. I said, can you respect and love a company? How can you love a company? It's an inanimate object. I said, this is the mistake. A company is a living machine. It's not an inanimate object. If you're going to create an inanimate object as a company and you can't love it, then you must ask yourself, why are you creating the company? And people who say, I put up a company to do some business, and I say, why do you want to do business? Because I want to earn money. Why do you want to earn money? Because I want lots of it. I said, is it possible for a company to have too much profit? They said, no, it's not possible. You must be able to celebrate your son's wedding for 10,000 crores. Otherwise, what the hell is it worth? I said, do you need oxygen to breathe? Yes. Where do you get your oxygen from? Through the air. How much oxygen is there in the air? 20%. If I gave you 100% oxygen, they said you'll be dead in a few hours or a few days. it's possible to get too much of a good thing. And oxygen is only an example. And profit is definitely the oxygen of a business. You don't need more profit. If the air has 20% oxygen, maybe your profit should also be only under 20%. If you've got wealth which is beyond that. And in my research, I went and saw a study that when Swami Vivekananda went to Chicago in 1893, all of us know the story of Swami Vivekananda. He was a fiery speaker. He took America by storm. And in those days, the person who was the richest man in the world was John D. Rockefeller. Whether he was Ambani or Adani, they can decide, but he's in that league of that time. And he made a statement because the audience was largely American enterprise people. They said, Swamiji, you're so captive, you talk about highfalutin stuff. But we don't understand what you're saying. We are business people. Tell us what we should do to run a good, clean, nice business which is useful to society. By the way, all this is recorded. I'm only quoting from the stuff I've read. So Swamiji thought about it and he said, well, if you want it without the philosophy, but you want the essence of Vedanta, then I would advise you to do only 4 things. It's so easy, you can write it down, but you find it damn tough to practice it from tomorrow. Now, what is the secret? Tell us. Vedanta's secret for business. Number 1, he said, become self-aware. Your enemy is not outside yourself, it's within yourself. To an American audience, this sounded very strange. To an Indian audience, it will at least sound familiar, though they may not know how to do it. They may go to Baba Ramdev to find out. Advice number 2.
What is number 1?
Be self-aware. Number 2, he said, protect your resources. All of us are able to do things in our life and our business because we have resources. Soil, air, water, people. Protect it. He said, what do you mean by protection? He said, don't exploit them. Now, this is long before ESG was invented. Nobody knew what's ESG. But Swami Vivekananda said it, and he said this is a Vedantic principle. I'm not sure, I'm not a scholar of Vedanta, so I cannot connect exactly how, in which part of Vedanta and which verse. But that doesn't matter unless I'm a Vedanta scholar, which I have absolutely no pretension of being. Protect your resources, number 2. Number 3, he said, make sure you serve others before you serve yourself. If you become a unicorn, has somebody else become a small bit of corn? And it is a way of saying this money may not, if you get lots of money, you may be a pipe through which the money is meant to go to somebody else. And the 4th and the last point, he said, take your decisions objectively, but implement them with compassion. Capital without compassion is of no use. He said this in a capitalist economy in 1893. One of his disciples was the famous French opera singer called Emma Calvé. I mean, in the 1880s, 1870s, she was the top. She was the Taylor Swift of opera. I don't know if she would like to be described that way, but let's say she was worth a lot of money. And somewhere she took a fancy to Swami Vivekananda and became his disciple. And when she heard this, she went to her dear friend, who was a guy called John D. Rockefeller. She said, hey, John, you must come and listen to this guy. So he came. And Emma Calvé has written this in her diary, which has been translated, and there are 10 volumes of Vivekananda's speeches and sayings, which I have not gone through all 10 volumes, but I found a story there. And John D. Rockefeller sat in front of this guy sitting on the floor with his legs crossed, with that type of, inclined. Swamiji looked up at him and he said, I believe you're the richest man in the world. He said, yeah, that's what they say. I said, how much richer than the average American are you? So I don't know, maybe 100 times. Swamiji said, do you think you're 100 times smarter than the average guy? And Rockefeller said, I must be, otherwise, why should I have the money? He said, has it ever occurred to you that you are a pipe, you are a conduit through which this must go back to society? He said, what utter rubbish. I worked my butt off and this is my money. He said, okay, that's your opinion. I'll just leave you with the thought. John D. Rockefeller went back, and I can imagine now, it is not in the diary. What a crazy guy, this Swamiji sitting in a saffron robe, saying, I'm a pipe. I'm not a bloody pipe, I'm John D. Rockefeller. But he thought about it. Swami Vivekananda had this very unusual characteristic of putting a thought into your head and just leaving it there. And I don't know, John D. Rockefeller must have thought about it and said, maybe this funny old Swamiji has a point. It took another 12 years, and John D. Rockefeller wrote all his money to the foundation. There's no Rockefeller business anymore. But the Rockefeller Foundation, doing social work, is well known. Again, they're not perfect, you can find some points of criticism. But I'm illustrating this, that John D. Rockefeller had the ability to put a thought into somebody's head, leave it, and then let him, through osmosis, absorb and interpret it. He did that a second time, and I will come back to the story of Tata's. When Jamshedji Tata met him on a steamer, in those days you went by steamboats, and they were both sailing from Yokohama to San Francisco. Long journey. By the way, Jamshedji Tata traveled almost 60% of the year, because out of the 60, 40 was on the steamer and only 20 was really doing business. Today we can of course fly. And he met a person who was much younger than him, maybe 40 years younger than him. And he said, let's have a chat. Shows an open-mindedness. What Gautam Buddha called the beginner's mindset. Now, why should a tycoon, who's worth, by Indian standards, quite a lot in those days, sit and talk to a Swamiji in a steamer? So Swamiji said, Mr. Tata, why don't you create an institution where Indians can do research and learn and be scientific? And Tata said, yeah, I'll think about it. He came back and said, yeah, maybe this guy's got a point. And he made a proposal by 1893 or 94 to create an Institute of Science. Then there's a long story, it's in the book, I won't go into it. Lord Curzon, that imperious Governor General of India at that time, he said, this is rubbish. You think Indians are capable of studying science? He wouldn't let go. Just like when we were in business, if the joint secretary says no to your application, you go to the additional secretary. She doesn't say, you go to the secretary. Otherwise, you go to the minister. He took a steamer and went off to see Lord Hamilton in London. Lord Hamilton being the India office head. He said, I want to set up an Institute of Science for my countrymen. It's my money. I'm not asking you for money. Allow me to set it up for God's sake. What is your problem? He said, yeah, I think you're right. It's your money. You want to spend it on these people? Go ahead. But why Curzon is not allowing me? So he sent a file note, to use our bureaucratic expression. And Curzon said, if you want to sink your money, you do what you like, go to hell. And Jamshedji Tata went to the Maharaja Wadyar of Mysore, who said, I got land in Bangalore, you can take it. And that's how the Indian Institute of Science came up. What does this show? It shows that a leader of the future, whether in that generation or today, must have an open mind, must be willing to talk to multiple people. And all of us have 3/4 of a closed mind, but we like to believe we are open-minded. And he must be persevering. That if I think this is good for this country, I'll do it. Just like when he wanted to put up a steel plant. And the guy said, if Indians make steel, remember, steel was what the equivalent of artificial intelligence today. It was the technology. Mr. Rao sitting here, he's worked in a steel company. Where is Mr. Rao? Mr. Rao, he will tell you. In those days, if you made steel, you're like Sam Altman today. And he said, well, I'll go to America, I'll find the best steel guy in the world. And then there's a story around it, which is all in the book, of course. And he brought him here. Not only did he bring him here, he made him live in Jamshedpur, which was a bloody hole of a place in those days. Sakshi it was called. And he came with his wife, and they stayed here to help us to learn how to make steel in those days. So it is a principle-centered thing that I think this is good for my people, and I'll do it. And he was answering the question in 3 phases, which is exactly the opposite of what business people do today. Question number 1, is it good for the country? Question number 2, is it good for the community? Question number 3, is it good for the Tata shareholder? You go to any entrepreneurial event in India, is it good for the entrepreneur? Incidentally, I hope it's not bad for the society and it's okay for India. But Jamshedji Tata, of course, we are attributing a lot of things to Jamshedji Tata because he never thought he's a very smart guy. He said, let me figure out. He said, I am not more generous than other people. I don't want to be qualified as the world's most generous person. I just want to have a simple set of principles with which I can run my business and pass on that simple set to my successor when my time comes. And his simple set of principles was, it's easier to make money, it's very difficult to nurture money. Again, today it's exactly the opposite. Everybody thinks it's easier to nurture money, professional managers, babus. Anybody who's doing a maintenance job, you see, he's doing Vishnu's job. I am Brahma, I am a creator. But when Commodore Vanderbilt, William Vanderbilt, who was the Adani of America in those days, in late 1800s, he used to run ports and steamships across the east coast of the US. He made $100 million, which is probably worth several billion now. And then he handed it over to his son, Cornelius Vanderbilt, handed over to William Vanderbilt, his son. And he said, son, I'll tell you one thing. It's easier to make this money. Your job is to nurture and grow it. That's tougher. And what happened after 25 years? Of course, the father had gone. And William Vanderbilt said, I wish he had not left me so much money because I don't know what there is to look forward to in life. You've taken the fire. And it's happening in family businesses, or not only family businesses. I'm taking family business because that constitutes 60, 70, 80% of our private sector economy. Now, people think the job is to make money, and that's the cleverness. Raise funds, take loans, make lots of money, and other people can manage it. I take the big decisions. And Jamshedji Tata, when he was dying in Germany, he had to go there to the sanatorium because health facilities were not good. On his deathbed, he told both his sons who came to see him, Dorabji Tata and Sir Ratan Tata, who is the grandfather of this Ratan Tata, whom we have now bid Shraddhanjali to. He said, sons, with great difficulty, coming from a small village in Navsari, I made all this money. If you can't increase it, at least protect it. Same sentiment. It's tougher to nurture money and grow business than to. So, I think entrepreneurs are very good. You need new ideas. But the number of people who can sustain, be humane, and be enlightened as to what to do with the money are very few. And that's the reason why I wonder. I'm not willing to make a statement that India doesn't have enough Mr. Tatas, Jamshedji Tata. But I wrote the piece that you referred to this morning in the Business Standard. I said that kind of capitalism, it's winner takes all. Grow fastest, quickest, and be biggest. That's dying, if not dead. And I'm now on in my years, but I hope by the time my son is grown up, grown up enough to figure it out, or my next 1 or 2 generations, they will think that I'm running a business for society. Incidentally, I'm also paid and I'm living comfortably. There's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. But many family managed businesses think the business is mine. And I once got into a debate with a family owner who said, "This company, my son must follow me." I said, "But it's not your company." He said, "Of course it's my company. I own 52% of the equity." I said, "But who owns the other 48? Who's buying your products? Who's working and giving his sweat to your company? They're all stakeholders in your company. You may not call them shareholders. How can you assume your son is good enough to take over?" And of course, wrong decisions made on succession can very often destroy a business, whether it's a family managed business or otherwise. So when we wrote this book, we wrote 10 P's: principles, philosophy. I should close up in the next 5 minutes, I hope. And under each P, we explored the philosophical dimension. What is a business philosophy? Many people say, "ये क्या philosophy की बात कर रहा है यार? हमको धंधा करना है." And I would like many people, everybody can't, to escape out of that gravity and come to a new gravity. Business has a philosophy, like your life has a philosophy. You may not articulate it. You may not be Mahatma Gandhi. You are not Mahatma Gandhi. I am not. But still, you have a philosophy. And if you have a child in the family, your son or grandson or whatever, you go and say, "Ayushman Bhava." Nobody thinks of his child as anything other than long lived. Then fate may do other things. Why should you not do the same with your company? If I'm starting up a company, why should I not say this must have a Dirghayus for 100 years? Why should I assume I'll make it fat and sell this and then I'll buy a house in Banjara Hills or wherever is the right place? I don't understand that you can create companies not worrying about how it will live for 100 years, 150 years. And so I studied Japanese companies, which are 400 years old, some of them. And their way of thinking is vastly different from across the Pacific Ocean in the US. All our management, and I see there are academics here, so I nod my eye at you without pointing my finger at you. Please teach people that the purpose of management is not to study. I'm nothing against American methods. I also went to Harvard. I also studied the same case studies. But remember that there's no business without compassion, which can live long. So is there a case for compassionate capitalism? And if so, how should it be, and how do we train our young people to come out of management institutes? And in a small way, the stories that we have written, because each of the P's is followed with 3 stories, 3 examples, which are stories from Tata's history. One of the early period, one of the middle period, and the last period. So that you are demonstrating that this P has stayed through for 150 years. It's not just a flash in the pan. Because you can go on saying the founder is a wonderful man, but to the founder's 7th generation, today Chandrasekhar is the 7th generation. If you can keep a philosophy going for 7 generations, it doesn't mean you're going to live forever, but you've achieved something which many people haven't. And therefore, it is every morning for 18 years, I'd go to the office at 9:30 and come back at 7:30, and I would work with this man for whom you've given a Shraddhanjali. And when I see him and his predecessors and potentially his successors, because I cannot predict the future, I see that spirit maintained. And I would like that spirit, that torch, to be lit in many other places. And I'm very grateful to HMA for giving me a chance. एंड नेवर फील दैट वो सब उनके लिए है, हमारे लिए नहीं है। वो जमशेदजी टाटा अलग है, वो महात्मा गांधी का काम है, हमको जो मर्जी है हम करेंगे। देयर इज अ बिट ऑफ गांधी इन ऑल ऑफ अस, देयर इज अ बिट ऑफ विवेकानंदा इन ऑल ऑफ अस, देयर इज अ बिट ऑफ टाटा इन ऑल ऑफ अस। उस दिए के जो विक है उसको जरा ध्यान से लगाना चाहिए।